I heard my husband's family planning my downfall, so I played along. My name is Claire, and what I'm about to share with you isn't just a story. It's a testimony of how sometimes silence can be your greatest weapon. Before I begin, I'd love to know, where are you listening from? And if you were in my shoes, what would you have done? Let me know in the comments. From the outside, my life looked perfect. I was married to Frank, a charismatic man with a calm smile and confident walk. He worked in real estate, sharp suits, neat haircuts, and a way of speaking that made people trust him instantly. We lived in a quiet, modern estate on the outskirts of the city. 2 cars in the driveway, neatly trimmed hedges, and a cozy 3-bedroom house that smelled like fresh linen and vanilla candles. I had built a career in marketing, nothing flashy but fulfilling. I was proud of the life we had created together. We'd been married for 5 years, and while it wasn't without its bumps, I thought we were solid. We prayed together, planned trips, shared jokes late into the night. At least that's what I believed. But the truth? I had no idea that beneath those warm Sunday lunches with his family, polite smiles, and "You're part of us now" speeches, a quiet storm was brewing. Frank's family wasn't exactly easy to navigate. His mother, Mrs. Thompson, had a way of asserting herself that made everyone else shrink a little. She wasn't cruel, at least not in obvious ways, but she had mastered the art of subtle disapproval. If she didn't like something, she wouldn't say it outright. Instead, she'd glance, purse her lips slightly, and murmur, interesting. And just like that, an entire room would shift. His sister, Vanessa, was even more challenging. She was 2 years older than me, unmarried, and openly proud of her first daughter role. She often referred to me as Claire in a way that sounded more like a challenge than a greeting. From the moment Frank introduced me to her, she sized me up like competition. Still, I tried. I showed up for family dinners, bought thoughtful gifts, helped in the kitchen, laughed at jokes I didn't find funny. I told myself, this is what family is. You build bridges. You don't light matches. It was a Saturday evening when the first sign appeared, a tiny crack I almost ignored. We were hosting Frank's family for dinner. The table was set beautifully. Cream tablecloth, gold cutlery, scented candles flickering softly. I'd prepared everything myself: roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, a simple salad, and warm apple pie for dessert. Midway through dinner, as I reached to pour Vanessa a glass of wine, I heard her mutter under her breath to her mother, "Enjoy it now. Things will change soon." I froze. For a second, I thought I'd imagined it. But Mrs. Thompson gave her a subtle, knowing nod. When I looked up, Vanessa smiled sweetly at me. "Claire, you really outdid yourself tonight. The chicken is edible." Frank laughed awkwardly, missing the sharp edge in her tone. I let it slide. I told myself, she's just being herself. Don't make trouble where there's none. But something about that "things will change soon" lingered in my mind like a shadow at the edge of light. Weeks passed. Life carried on. Frank and I were busy: work deadlines, church programs, a friend's wedding coming up. Everything seemed normal, but the atmosphere around his family shifted subtly. Mrs. Thompson started visiting more often unannounced. Sometimes she'd walk into my kitchen and reorganize things, claiming, "This is how a proper home should be run." Vanessa stopped pretending to be civil altogether. Her snide remarks became open criticism. "Claire, don't you think it's time you focus less on work and more on, the home? My brother deserves a woman who puts family first. You're always busy with one project or the other." Frank usually brushed it off with, "Vanessa, stop exaggerating," but he never actually defended me. That silence hurt more than her words. Then came the day that changed everything. Frank had told me he'd be working late. I had no plans for the evening, so after dinner, I decided to head upstairs to sort out the guest room. His mother and Vanessa were supposed to stop by the next day for Sunday lunch. As I climbed the stairs, I heard the faint sound of voices, familiar voices, coming from Frank's study downstairs. The door was slightly ajar, and my curiosity made me pause. Inside, I could hear Vanessa's voice, low but firm. "Frank, you can't keep stalling. She's too comfortable. If you don't act soon, she'll take everything. We've seen this before. You need to protect what's yours, what's ours." My blood ran cold. Then Mrs. Thompson's voice followed, calm and controlled. "My son, I raised you better. A woman like Claire, she's clever. Don't be fooled by that quiet face. You need to start separating finances little by little. Shift properties back into your name. Let her feel like nothing's changing. By the time she realizes, it'll be too late." I gripped the railing, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure they could hear it. Frank's voice came next, hesitant. "Mum, Vanessa, this is a lot. Claire isn't like that." "Frank," Vanessa snapped, "you're blinded by love. She's not from our family. Blood first. Don't be naive." And then Mrs. Thompson delivered the line that shattered something deep inside me. "A wise man always prepares for betrayal. Whether it comes or not, preparation is key." There was silence, then Frank sighed. "All right. I'll handle it, but slowly. She mustn't suspect a thing." My knees nearly buckled. I pressed a hand to my mouth to stop myself from gasping. I stood there in the hallway, shaking. My husband, the man who held my hands at the altar and promised forever. The man who laughed with me at night. The man who knew my fears and dreams. He was sitting there, calmly discussing how to strip me of everything, all because his family planted seeds of doubt. I could have burst in, screaming. I could have packed my bags that night. I could have confronted him, demanded answers, cried. But as I stood there, something inside me shifted. The shock turned to pain. The pain turned to quiet anger. And that anger turned into clarity. No, I wouldn't confront them. I wouldn't scream. I wouldn't cry in front of them. Instead, I whispered to myself, "If they want a game, I'll give them one." And right there, in that dimly lit hallway, I made a decision that would change everything. I would play along. I would smile at dinners. I would act as if I suspected nothing. And while they plotted my downfall, I would quietly, carefully build my own plan. They thought they were ahead, but I was 2 steps further. Sometimes silence is not weakness. It's strategy. While they plotted behind my back, I quietly began to build my shield and my sword. I remember that evening vividly. Frank and I had just returned from his mother's house. The atmosphere in the car was thick, almost suffocating. He didn't know that the polite smile I wore during dinner masked the storm brewing in my chest. The things I had overheard that afternoon, the cold precision of their words, the entitlement, the betrayal, they replayed in my mind like a broken record. They thought they were ahead, but I was already 2 steps further. The next few weeks, I didn't confront anyone. I didn't run to Frank crying. "No," I observed. I watched every movement, every exchange. I started noticing how his sister, Rebecca, would drop subtle remarks about independence and family assets in conversations. His aunt started visiting more often. His mother would call at odd hours and lower her voice whenever I walked into the room. They thought I was oblivious, but I was taking mental notes. Every single one. At night, when Frank was asleep, I began keeping a small journal, a record of everything. Dates, statements, behaviors. Not because I was weak, but because I knew evidence is power. The first tangible step I took was to secure myself financially. I had my business, a growing interior decor firm, but most of our assets were jointly managed. If their plan was to isolate me and take control, then I had to fortify my foundation. Without raising any suspicion, I created separate business accounts. I moved some of my earnings into secure investments in my name. I contacted my lawyer discreetly to review property documents. If the storm they were preparing hit, I would not be swept away. Frank, he was a complicated man. Charming, intelligent, but also tied tightly to his family's influence. After the conversation I overheard, I began to pay attention to his loyalty. Was he fully aware of their plans? Or was he an unknowing pawn? To find out, I started engaging him in subtle conversations. Over dinner, I'd casually ask about his family's future plans. During drives, I'd bring up topics about trust and marriage. His responses were telling. Sometimes he'd deflect, other times he'd sound uneasy, like he was carrying a secret he wasn't ready to share. I didn't push.
Not yet.
I simply listened. And every word he said became another piece of my puzzle. One thing I learned early in life: never fight alone. So I started identifying quiet allies. People within their circle who had no loyalty to their schemes. Rebecca's friend, who admired me but disliked their arrogance. The family driver, who had seen and heard too much. Even Frank's cousin, who worked at the family company. Through careful conversations, subtle acts of kindness, and strategic timing, I built a network of eyes and ears. Not spies, observers. And soon, information started flowing to me without them even knowing it. 3 months after the day I overheard them, Frank's family hosted a big dinner party. I wore my calm like perfume. My dress was elegant, my smile serene. But inside me, every sense was alert. They gathered around, laughing and toasting, pretending to be one big happy family. But beneath the surface, tension crackled like electricity. I noticed the way Sandra, Frank's sister, exchanged a knowing glance with his mother when the lawyer mentioned something about future trusts. And then it happened. His mother made a toast, her voice sweet but laced with undertones. To family, the one true backbone. No matter what happens, family remains. The way she looked at me when she said, "No matter what happens," told me everything I needed to know. They were preparing to make their move. But what they didn't know, I had already set the board. A week after that dinner, I decided to test Frank's loyalty. I told him, casually, that my lawyer had advised I register one of my properties solely in my name. I watched his face. The slight hesitation before he smiled. The forced reassurance. "Why do you need to do that?" "We're a team," he said. I nodded, pretending to agree, but inside, I marked that moment. It told me he wasn't entirely innocent. One rainy afternoon, I got a call from the family's lawyer, the same one who handled most of Frank's inheritance. He sounded uncomfortable. "Claire, I was told to begin drafting a new trust structure. Your name wasn't included. Are you aware of this?" No, I wasn't. But I didn't let my voice shake. "Thank you for informing me," I said calmly. I hung up, sat in silence for a moment, then smiled. They had made their first move, and it was time for me to make mine. Over the next few months, I started to quietly tighten my control over everything I could. I legally secured my business. I bought a small but valuable property in my name alone. I updated my will. And then I began documenting their actions. I gathered recordings, screenshots, and testimony from trusted allies. Every sneaky conversation, every suspicious instruction. Slowly, methodically, I built a quiet wall they couldn't see. Then came the night Frank slipped. He came home late, drunk, and muttered things he shouldn't have. I sat by his side, pretending to be half asleep, while he complained to his sister on the phone. "She's smarter than we thought.
But don't worry.
We'll handle it. I just need her to trust me a little more." My chest tightened. So it was true. He was not a pawn. He was a player. But that night, under the soft glow of the bedside lamp, I made a silent vow. If they wanted a game, I would play, and I would win. Tell me, if you were in my shoes, would you have confronted him then and there? Or would you, like me, keep playing along while quietly building your fortress? Life has a way of turning tables. People may think they're the ones pulling the strings, but sometimes it's the quiet one in the corner who's already written the script. If you followed my story from the beginning, then you know how deep this betrayal went. The people I trusted most, my husband Frank and his family, sat together, plotting my downfall like I was some stranger. But what they didn't know was that I had already started playing my own game. It began slowly, almost imperceptibly. A look here, a hesitation there, a sudden kindness from me when they expected confrontation. I wanted them relaxed, confident, to think they were winning. Because that's when people make mistakes. Frank thought he was in control. His mother believed she had already cornered me. His sisters whispered like little birds, fluttering in and out of the house, unaware that every whisper only fed the fire I was building silently. I kept telling myself, Claire, don't react. Prepare. And that's exactly what I did. The first step in my plan was silence. Strategic silence. I stopped questioning Frank about his odd movements. I stopped arguing when he came home late or whispered on the phone at night. Instead, I observed. I noticed patterns. Every Thursday night, he left the house for business meetings. Every Sunday afternoon, his mother and sisters met at a certain cafe and was too. Frank's phone always vibrated around 11:30 p.m. with a message that made him leave the room. I began documenting everything: dates, times, faces, places. A few trusted friends helped me discreetly. One worked at a restaurant and often spotted Frank with a particular woman. Another had a cousin in real estate who discovered that a new apartment had been leased in Frank's name, without my knowledge. I smiled through it all. Outwardly, I was still the supportive wife. But inside, the chessboard was forming. And I was carefully positioning my queen. The second step was to make them underestimate me completely. I started playing the role they wanted me to play. The naive, obedient wife. I stopped interfering in financial discussions, I avoided family arguments, and I even volunteered to host Frank's mother's birthday dinner at our house. They were delighted. Sandra, his sister, even said, finally Claire is learning her place. If only she knew. Behind that smile, I had already scheduled meetings with 2 lawyers, a financial advisor, and a trusted journalist friend. Frank and I owned several joint properties and businesses, but unknown to him, I had been the one managing most of the legal paperwork from the beginning. I knew where the weak points were. I knew what he valued most. And that was where I aimed. Then came the day that changed everything. Frank came home late one night, smelling of perfume that wasn't mine. I didn't confront him. Instead, I waited till he went into the shower, unlocked his phone with the code I'd quietly memorized, and took screenshots of every incriminating message. There it was. Proof of the plot. Messages between Frank, his mother, and Sandra discussing how to slowly isolate me, move money behind my back, and eventually force me out of our home and business. My hands trembled as I read. Not because I was shocked, but because the final puzzle piece had clicked into place. I knew what I had to do. I started by moving assets quietly. I transferred funds from joint accounts to secure legal trust accounts under my name. I alerted my lawyer to flag any suspicious withdrawals or property transfers. Then I approached key stakeholders in our businesses and shared the real situation, privately, calmly, factually. Many were shocked. Some had already suspected something was wrong.
I didn't stop there.
I reached out to the woman Frank was seeing, not to fight, but to inform. She didn't know he was married. When I showed her everything, her face crumbled. That was a critical move. By removing the secrecy of his affair, I stripped him of one of his strongest weapons, manipulation through lies. Meanwhile, in the house, I remained composed. Frank thought I was oblivious. His mother kept acting superior, Sandra threw snide remarks. But I was already 2 steps ahead. It happened on a Sunday evening. The family was gathered at our house for dinner, an occasion I insisted on hosting. The atmosphere was thick with fake smiles. I served the food myself, moving calmly between them like nothing was wrong. Then, mid-meal, I placed my phone on the table and pressed play. A series of audio recordings filled the air, Frank and his family plotting against me. Their voices, their words, their cruelty. Every detail, crystal clear. Frank froze. His mother's spoon clattered onto her plate. Sandra stared wide-eyed. I leaned back in my chair and said quietly, I heard everything. All of it. For a few seconds, silence hung like a blade. Then the shouting began. Frank tried to deny. His mother tried to manipulate. Sandra cried. But I didn't flinch. I laid out the legal documents, bank records, screenshots. Every move they had made, I had countered. Every plot I had dismantled. Frank's face turned pale as he realized I had outplayed him. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. Lawyers stepped in. Properties were frozen. Our joint business was split, and thanks to my foresight, I walked away with control of the most profitable branch. Frank's family scrambled, but there was nothing they could do. I had every legal angle covered. Frank tried to beg, switching from anger to tears to promises. But it was too late. I told him calmly, "You built this betrayal piece by piece. Now you can live with the ruins." His family's influence crumbled. Business partners distanced themselves. The woman he was seeing walked away after learning the truth. Frank stood alone, watching as everything he took for granted slipped away. And me? I rose. Not out of spite, but out of strength. Today, as I share this story with you, I want you to understand something. Betrayal doesn't always need shouting matches or chaos. Sometimes, silence and strategy are louder than any confrontation. I rebuilt my life, step by step. I moved into my own place. I expanded my business independently. I surrounded myself with people who valued honesty and respect. Frank eventually tried to come back, not out of love, but desperation. I looked at him one last time and said, "You thought you were ahead, but I was 2 steps further." He lowered his head. That was the last time I saw him. So, my dear listeners, what would you have done in my shoes? Would you have confronted them immediately, or played along until the right moment? Life has a way of turning tables, doesn't it? Thank you for listening to my story. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, tell me where you are and what you'd have done differently. And remember, sometimes the greatest victories are the quiet ones.